Ever wonder if the coffee creamer sitting in your fridge is actually cream? Think again. The bottle you poured into your coffee this morning may contain far more vegetable oils, sweeteners, and industrial additives than real dairy. I investigated some of the most popular coffee creamers sold across America, and what I found was surprising. In this countdown, we're exposing the 7 creamers you may want to skip and revealing the 3 real dairy options that actually deliver what the label seems to promise. The number one brand shocked me the most. Number 7, Coffeemate Original. This is the creamer that practically built the modern coffee creamer industry. For decades, millions of Americans have reached for Coffeemate, believing they're adding a little creaminess to their morning coffee. But here's the first surprise. Traditional Coffeemate isn't actually cream. The classic formula is primarily built around corn syrup solids, vegetable oils, and milk-derived proteins rather than fresh cream. That doesn't mean the product is unsafe or illegal. It operates completely within FDA regulations. The bigger question is why those ingredients are there. Real cream is expensive. It requires refrigeration, has a shorter shelf life, and fluctuates with dairy prices. Vegetable oils and corn-based ingredients are dramatically cheaper and more stable, allowing manufacturers to produce a product that can sit on store shelves for months. The result is a product engineered for consistency and profit margins rather than authenticity. What makes Coffeemate interesting is that many consumers assume they're buying something close to cream when they're actually purchasing a highly processed formulation designed to mimic cream's texture and flavor. That's why it lands at number 7 on this countdown. Not because it's dangerous, but because it's one of the clearest examples of how the coffee aisle has slowly redefined what cream even means. Number 6, International Delight. Original. At first glance, International Delight looks like a completely different product from Coffeemate. Different bottle, different branding, different promises. But once you turn the bottle around, a familiar pattern starts to emerge. The creamy texture most people associate with dairy doesn't come primarily from cream. Instead, much of the mouthfeel is created through a combination of water, vegetable oils, sweeteners, stabilizers, and emulsifiers designed to imitate what real cream naturally does on its own. The product is perfectly legal and widely consumed, but it's another example of food engineering replacing traditional ingredients. What's fascinating is how the packaging creates a completely different impression. The bottle often features rich cream swirls, coffeehouse imagery, and comforting language that subtly encourages shoppers to think dairy. Yet the economics tell the real story. Real cream is one of the most expensive ingredients a manufacturer can use. Vegetable oils are dramatically cheaper, more shelf-stable, and easier to transport across the country. And that's the theme you'll see repeatedly throughout this countdown. The goal isn't necessarily to make the best-tasting creamer. The goal is to create a product that tastes close enough to cream while costing significantly less to manufacture. You didn't buy it because you made a bad decision. You bought it because the packaging was designed to make it feel like the obvious choice. That's exactly why International Delight earns the number 6 spot. It sells the experience of cream while relying heavily on industrial shortcuts that most consumers never notice. Number 5, Starbucks Coffee Creamer. This one catches a lot of people off guard. When you see the Starbucks logo, you're not just buying a creamer, you're buying a reputation. The image of freshly brewed coffee, skilled baristas, premium ingredients. The entire brand is built around the idea of a better coffee experience. And to be fair, Starbucks creamers generally contain more actual dairy than many budget competitors. But that's where the story gets interesting. Many flavored Starbucks creamers still rely on added sugars, natural flavors, stabilizers, and processing aids that help recreate the signature coffeehouse taste consumers expect. The goal isn't necessarily authenticity, it's consistency. Every bottle has to taste exactly the same whether it's sold in California, Florida, or New York. Consistency at that scale requires formulation shortcuts that a local coffee shop would never need. The packaging does a lot of heavy lifting, too. The sleek bottle, the familiar green logo, the promise of bringing the coffeehouse home. Those visual cues encourage consumers to focus on the brand rather than the ingredient panel. Now, to Starbucks' credit, these creamers are generally a step above many non dairy oil based competitors. That's important context. But the gap between what people imagine they're buying and what they're actually buying is still significant. You're picturing fresh cream poured into coffee. What you're often getting is a carefully engineered product designed to replicate that experience for weeks on a grocery shelf. That's why Starbucks lands at number 5. Not because it's the worst, because it's one of the strongest examples of how branding can make processed ingredients feel more premium than they really are. Number 4, Dunkin' Extra Extra Creamer. Dunkin' built its reputation on simplicity: coffee, cream, sugar, nothing complicated. So when shoppers see a Dunkin' creamer bottle in the grocery store, many assume they're getting something close to what goes into a cup at their local Dunkin' shop. But that's not really what's happening. The grocery store version is designed for a completely different purpose. It has to survive transportation, sit in refrigerated cases for extended periods, and deliver the exact same flavor profile every single time. To accomplish that, manufacturers rely on a carefully engineered blend of dairy ingredients, sweeteners, stabilizers, flavorings, and texture enhancers, rather than simply using cream and sugar. Again, there's nothing illegal about this. The product is doing exactly what it was designed to do. The issue is expectation versus reality. Most consumers imagine a simplified coffee house ingredient list. What they actually get is a formulation optimized for shelf life and mass production. And this is where the economics become impossible to ignore. Real cream fluctuates in price, sugar prices change, fresh ingredients spoil, industrial formulations solve all of those problems. The result is a product that tastes remarkably consistent, but moves another step away from what most people would recognize as genuine dairy. That's why Dunkin' lands at number. It's uniquely bad, but because it perfectly illustrates how America's biggest coffee brands often sell the image of simplicity while relying on the complexity of food science behind the scenes. Number 3, Walmart's Great Value French Vanilla Creamer. Every countdown like this needs a budget brand because if you're trying to stretch a grocery budget, Great Value often feels like the logical choice. And that's exactly why millions of bottles leave store shelves every year. The problem isn't that Great Value is uniquely bad. The problem is that it reveals what happens when manufacturers try to hit the absolute lowest possible price point. At this level, every penny matters. Real cream costs money. Vanilla costs money. Fresh dairy requires stricter handling and shorter shelf lives. To keep prices low, manufacturers often lean more heavily on inexpensive sweeteners, vegetable oils, flavor systems, and stabilizers that recreate the experience of cream without relying heavily on actual cream. What you're paying for isn't authenticity. You're paying for efficiency, and that's an important distinction. The bottle may show rich cream pouring into coffee. The flavor may be called French vanilla, but much of what creates that taste comes from industrial flavor engineering rather than vanilla beans or premium dairy ingredients. To be fair, Great Value never claims to be a luxury product. It does exactly what it's designed to do: provide a sweet, creamy coffee experience at a very low cost. But once you understand how those savings are achieved, the entire product starts to look different. You're not really buying cream, you're buying a highly optimized approximation of cream. And that's why Great Value takes the number 3 spot, because it exposes the central trade off running through the entire coffee creamer industry. Lower prices almost always require more processing, more shortcuts, and more distance from what real dairy originally was. Number 2, Silk Original Dairy-Free Creamer. This is where the countdown takes a sharp turn, because unlike the brands we've discussed so far, Silk isn't pretending to be traditional dairy. In fact, the entire brand was built around the idea of avoiding dairy altogether. For many consumers, that sounds like a healthier choice, and depending on your dietary needs, it absolutely can be. The problem is that dairy-free and less processed are not the same thing. Many plant-based creamers rely on a surprisingly complex formula to recreate the richness that naturally exists in cream. Manufacturers often use vegetable oils, gums, stabilizers, emulsifiers, and flavor systems to create the smooth texture people expect when they pour creamer into coffee. The result can be remarkably convincing, but it also moves the product further away from simple ingredients. This is where the health halo effect becomes powerful. Consumers see words like plant-based, dairy-free, vegan, or lactose-free and instinctively assume the product must be cleaner than traditional creamers. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes it isn't. The ingredient list is still the deciding factor. To Silk's credit, the company is transparent about being a plant-based product. There's no illusion that you're buying actual cream. But when you compare it to genuine dairy, you're still looking at a heavily formulated product designed to imitate something nature already created. And that's why Silk lands at number 2. Not because it's deceptive, but because it reminds us that replacing dairy doesn't automatically eliminate processing. Sometimes it simply replaces one set of industrial shortcuts with another. The healthiest choice isn't determined by whether a product is dairy or non-dairy. It's determined by how much engineering was required to make it look, feel, and taste like real food in the first place. Number 1, Natural Bliss Vanilla Coffee Creamer. This is the one that surprises the most people, because unlike the other brands on this list, Natural Bliss doesn't look processed. Quite the opposite. The packaging is clean, the colors are soft, the branding feels calm and natural. The word bliss itself sounds like something you'd find in a health food store rather than a mass-produced grocery product. And that's exactly why it lands at number 1. This isn't a budget creamer. This isn't a discount brand. This is the product many consumers intentionally upgrade to when they're trying to make a better choice. To be fair, Natural Bliss contains more recognizable ingredients than many competitors. In fact, compared to heavily oil-based creamers, it is unquestionably a step in the right direction. But here's the issue. The marketing creates an impression that the product is much closer to fresh cream than it actually is. Most shoppers see the minimalist label and assume they're purchasing something nearly identical to pouring cream directly into their coffee. Yet, flavored versions still rely on added sugars and flavoring systems that transform a simple dairy product into a manufactured food product designed for consistency and shelf life. The gap between perception and reality is what matters. You paid extra because the packaging signaled purity. You trusted the branding because it looked transparent. You weren't being careless. You were responding exactly the way the package was designed to make you respond. And that's why Natural Bliss becomes the number 1 creamer to skip. Not because it's the most processed product in the aisle, not because it's unsafe, but because it creates the largest illusion. It convinces consumers they've escaped the processed creamer industry while still participating in it. And in a category built on perception, that makes it the most revealing product on the entire list. Real Dairy Brand number 3, Horizon Organic Heavy Whipping Cream. After looking at so many products designed to imitate cream, Horizon Organic feels refreshingly simple. Pick up the carton and you'll notice something unusual immediately. The ingredient list is incredibly short. In many cases, it's simply organic cream and sometimes a stabilizing ingredient depending on the product variation. That's it. No corn syrup solids, no vegetable oil blends, no long list of ingredients designed to recreate what dairy already does naturally. And that's the key difference. Horizon isn't trying to manufacture creaminess. It's selling actual cream. Now, it's important to acknowledge the trade-off. Horizon costs more than many coffee creamers on a per-ounce basis. That's real, but that higher price reflects the cost of producing genuine dairy rather than building a cheaper substitute from lower-cost ingredients. You may notice that real cream behaves differently in coffee, too. It doesn't always create the ultra-sweet, dessert-like flavor profile that modern creamers have trained consumers to expect. That's because it's real dairy, not a flavored coffee additive. If your goal is authenticity rather than convenience, Horizon Organic Heavy Whipping Cream is one of the simplest upgrades you can make. Sometimes the healthiest ingredient list isn't the shortest marketing claim, it's the shortest actual ingredient list. Real Dairy brand number 2, Organic Valley Heavy Whipping Cream. If Horizon shows you what a cleaner cream can look like, Organic Valley takes that idea even further. This is one of the few major dairy brands that still has a reputation for keeping things simple. When consumers start reading ingredient labels seriously, Organic Valley often becomes one of the first names they notice. Why? Because the focus remains on actual dairy rather than recreating dairy through industrial formulation. And that's an important distinction. Throughout this entire countdown, you've seen companies spend enormous amounts of effort trying to imitate cream. Organic Valley starts with the real thing instead. The company sources milk from certified organic farms and emphasizes traditional dairy production standards. Depending on the specific product and region, ingredient lists can be remarkably short compared with most coffee creamers. Now, let's be honest about the trade-off. This isn't the cheapest option in the dairy aisle. In fact, many shoppers walk right past it because they can buy a flavored creamer for less money. But that's exactly the lesson of this investigation. The lower price often comes from replacing expensive dairy with cheaper ingredients. Organic Valley charges more because cream itself is expensive. That's not a luxury markup. That's the actual cost of producing real dairy without relying on a long list of shortcuts. When you pour it into coffee, you're tasting cream, not a simulation of cream. And that's why Organic Valley earns the number 2 spot among the real dairy options. It reminds you what coffee tasted like before food scientists started redesigning it. Real Dairy brand number 1, Organic Valley Grassmilk half and half. This is the product that completely changes the conversation. After spending an entire video looking at creamers engineered to imitate dairy, you finally arrive at a product that doesn't need to imitate anything because it already is the real thing. Organic Valley Grassmilk half and half has become a favorite among nutrition experts largely because of its remarkably simple ingredient list: organic milk and organic cream. No vegetable oils, no corn syrup solids, no gums in the standard half and half product, no long list of ingredients designed to create artificial creaminess. That simplicity matters. Throughout this countdown, you've seen the same pattern repeated over and over. Manufacturers start with inexpensive ingredients, then spend enormous resources trying to make them behave like cream. Organic Valley takes the opposite approach. It starts with cream. The result is a product that tastes different from most commercial creamers. Less sweet, less flashy, less like a dessert. And that's exactly the point. Many Americans have become so accustomed to flavored creamers that real dairy can initially seem almost plain. What you're experiencing isn't a lack of flavor, it's the absence of industrial flavor engineering. Now, let's be honest, this isn't the cheapest option in the dairy case. You'll usually pay more than you would for a mass market creamer. But that higher price reflects the actual cost of producing real dairy instead of manufacturing a substitute from lower cost ingredients. That's value, not markup. If you remember only one thing from this entire investigation, make it this: the closer a coffee creamer gets to real cream, the shorter the ingredient list usually becomes. And that's why Organic Valley Grassmilk half and half earns the number 1 spot. Not because it's perfect, not because it's trendy, but because it reminds you what coffee looked like before the creamer industry convinced America that cream needed a chemistry set to be creamy. Final aisle rule. The next time you're standing in the coffee aisle, ignore the front label completely. Flip the bottle over. If the ingredient list starts with vegetable oil, corn syrup solids, or contains a long list of gums and stabilizers, you're looking at a product designed to imitate cream. If the ingredient list is mostly milk and cream, you're much closer to the real thing. That's the simplest rule in the entire store. And once you see it, you'll never shop for coffee creamer the same way again.